Sorry about that.
That's okay. I always start out by giving praise to the ancestors, and I'm going to do that this evening by sharing the screen. And with technology being as lovely as it is and as functional and as competent as it is, we should be able to see all of this once we get started. See, I talked about technology being what it is. Okay, well, it's not happening right now, so I'm going to have to go straight into what you were doing before. Stop this sharing. Oh my goodness, this is.
Let's see what's inside. I really like.
Oh my goodness.
It's got hand grips on the side.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it at a smaller screen, it seems like, in order to get this to work. I don't know about you, but every time I hear the national anthem, I get misty. When I joined the Marine Corps, I did not know the national anthem, the Black national anthem. I knew America's national anthem, but I did not know the Black national anthem. I knew the Marine Corps hymn, but I didn't know the Black national anthem. So when I made damn sure that I would learn something that was about me, my people, that I would be uplifting. Because when I was in jail, those 29 months, I promised myself, I said, when I get out of here, I will spend the rest of my life educating my people. That's what was incumbent upon me. We're going to be talking about, and I have a PowerPoint presentation dealing with historical trauma's impact on African Americans, its lasting legacy. When we hear the word trauma, normally you think about maybe an ICU unit. When someone was in a car accident, they had trauma to the brain or to some part of the body. What often goes overlooked is the trauma that can occur to one's psychic, to one's emotion, and how if it's done repeatedly over hundreds of years, it's almost like it becomes an integral part of one's DNA. So that's what we will be doing for the next few moments. And so far, technology is with us. Keep your fingers crossed, because you never know where it's going, because we don't control this, and virtually has a mind of its own. So we're going to see how we go with that. Okay, let's do slideshow. All right, here we go. Thank you. William Faulkner, Historical Trauma's Impact on African Americans, Its Lasting Legacy. I've long had an interest in things that involve history. Those things are continuing to have an impact on our lives each and every day, whether we know it or not. Currently reading a book dealing with the 1918 Spanish flu, and it's amazing how what occurred back then, those lessons taught back then, are not being learned by those who are in power nowadays. So that whoever said, well, if you don't learn your history, you're likely to repeat it, they certainly knew what they were talking about. William Faulkner, the great American novelist, said, the past is never dead. It's not even past. We live in one continuous now. If history could exist in a vacuum, those events that transpired hundreds, 10,000 years ago would have no impact on what is going on now. But we know all too well that those things that happened back then in a real way laid the groundwork for what is transpiring now. And protocol calls for that you don't read your PowerPoint, but some people are online by way of telephone, so they don't have the benefit of being able to read it, so I will read it anyway. And I've never been one for protocol anyways. Those of you who know me know that. Dr. John Henry Clark, one of our most renowned historians, is correct in his saying, the events that transpired 5,000 years ago, 5 months ago, and 5 minutes ago have determined what will happen 5 minutes from now, 5 months from now, and 5,000 years from now. All history is a current event. When you were born, be that 30, 40, 50, 20 years ago, to what's going on now, it's a current event. You are the essence, all of us are the epitome of all that we've ever been, all that we've done to this very date. So we cannot isolate those kinds of things. When psychiatrists interview, when they have clients, they ask if you were the firstborn, secondborn, what was your childhood like? Because as much as we would like to think that we're able to divorce ourselves from our past, the past is an integral part to where we are and what we are right now. When I use the term historical trauma, we're talking a term used by social workers, historians, and psychologists, which refers to the cumulative emotional and psychological wounding of an individual or generations caused by a traumatic experience or event. Historical trauma and its manifestations are examples of transgenerational trauma. We're talking about things that occurred over centuries of time and whose repercussions are being felt to this very day. Who is mostly impacted by historical trauma? Native Americans, our country's First Nations peoples. I don't think anybody can argue that. The Trail of Tears and treaties that were promised and broken by President Andrew Jackson, and the list goes on and on. immigrants and the challenges they continue to go through right now, and whether they're coming over the border, under the border, or trying to get here by boat, those challenges remain. And America prides itself in being a country of immigrants. It prides itself in people who came from other countries past Ellis Island and was able to look at the Statue of Liberty and all that it talks about, bring me your poor, your tired to yearn free air. All of that seems to be something of the past. People of color, African Americans, who first arrived at least to the 13 colonies in 1619, and as we celebrated our 400th anniversary of having been on these shores last year, we certainly know something about trauma. And those families living in poverty in a capitalist system, and by capitalism, we're talking about an economic system where production and distribution are privately owned and operated for profit. Not to have money can impact not only how long you live, where you live, the education you receive, the medical care or lack thereof that you receive, and that in itself causes a great deal of trauma also. Transatlantic slave trade, Old Point Comfort, 1619. For a long time, we thought that Jamestown, Virginia was the initial arrival point, but history has shown that it was Old Point Comfort, 1619. First 20 slaves arrived to the New World. They didn't volunteer to be here. They didn't sign up to be here. And to say that Africans played a big part, no doubt about that. They had collaborators who would fight with warring tribes. They would capture them. The European would come, who were the perpetrators, and they in turn would deal, trade, whatever they had to do. And the victims being those Africans who were captured and sent to the islands, be they Jamaica, Haiti, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Virginia, North Carolina, and all the other states. These 20 would be the beginning of millions more to come. Free labor was needed to fill the financial coffers of the colonies and European backers. It's all about the Benjamins, as the young folk were saying, and it continues to be about that. And it was no different back then. What played a major, major role in the enslavement of our ancestors was cotton. Cotton was king. And there's a little series out now about Queen Sugar, where sugar cane was king. And if you've ever seen the movie, well, I'm getting off. Let me stay on track. I'll wander from time to time. From 1790, 700 enslaved Africans are on these shores. Significant number, no doubt about it, but it pales in comparison to what would occur only 60 years later. In 1850, 3 million, increase driven by what? Cotton. It took one enslaved person 10 hours to remove seeds from 1 pound of cotton. 10 hours for 1 pound of cotton. And when you think about cotton, I picked cotton. I mean, I didn't pick it because I had to. I was driving down the road of North Carolina, saw some and stopped, pulled over and picked one or two. But when you open up a jar of aspirin, you get that little bit of cotton. That is a very small amount. And to imagine a bale of cotton, pounds and pounds of it, the acres and acres that would have to be walked and picked and the back-breaking labor, all of that 10 hours to remove seeds from 1 pound came to an end. In 1793, when Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin, which cleans as much cotton as can be picked. You pick it, Eli Whitney's cotton gin will clean it. Cotton grown on same land will deplete soil after 3 years. So if you don't rotate your crops, the soil will be depleted. So they needed more land. So what did the European do? Well, let's take a look. The need for land was met by the US government sending in the military to take land from Native Americans in Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. Land was sold to white people, landowners on the cheap. Suddenly there are millions of acres, abundance of land. What do we need now? Well, we need labor. 1790, as I said earlier, 700,000 enslaved. By 1850, 3 million. Now, what you see on the screen right now is in bold letters. At slavery's highest point, the total value of all enslaved surpassed the monetary value of the railroad and all industries in the nation combined. Now, I don't know about you, but I always thought the railroad was the biggest industry America ever had. The question came, do you put the railroad where the towns are, or do you put the towns where the railroad would likely be. But at its highest point, the major funder of this nation, the foundation, certainly were the enslaved people who picked the cotton. So it's plain to see that the institution of slavery turned a poor, fledgling nation into a financial powerhouse, and the cotton plantation was America's first big business. On the backs, on the shoulders, from the sweat, the blood, and toil of my ancestors. The institution of enslavement, well, that was no happy physics party. And even though there were some historians that tried to make it look like we signed up for that it wasn't as bad as it was, even Roots couldn't do it justice, because even the mind cannot conceive of some of the atrocious things people could do to another human being. Oh, Ahmad, but they didn't see you, your ancestors, as human beings. They were animals. So that made it easy for them to rape, to maim, to plunder, to sell, to take the children away, and do whatever they wanted to. Complicated systems established to determine how much labor and money was needed to produce each bale of cotton. Manuals and credentials developed so enslavers could trade information about what to feed, how to house, and how to talk to the enslaved. Because enslavers were tracking everyone's production, falling short of quota resulted in being beaten. Behind all this capitalistic rationality was extreme manifestations of violence and torture. During centuries of enslavement, Black families were mutilated, lynched, raped, pillaged, and auctioned off wholesale like a horse, a cow, or chicken. Young children separated from their mothers, wives separated from their husbands. Ultimately, the entire Black family structure was destroyed. Transgenerational trauma. So we're looking at a situation that didn't occur one time. When the World Trade Center went down in 2001, September 11, doctors and psychiatrists and all types of social scientists were called in. And there were many people who received thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars for the trauma they experienced. Now, I'm not minimizing the importance of what happened there. I was not there. I have no idea what it would have been like to be in a building that was hit by planes, rushing to get off, and knowing that people who were stuck on those higher floors would never see another day. But that was one day. We're talking about rapings and maimings that went on day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, century after century, that came down, that continues to come down through the genetic stream. And how it manifests itself nowadays, we'll take a look a little later on. But we can never underestimate why some of the things that are occurring in our communities right now happen. And even though it may go beyond our imagination to find words to express or explain what's happening, I believe if we take a look to the past and follow it forward, we understand that these things are not happening in a vacuum. They are not occurring in isolation. It's a direct result of transgenerational trauma. Trauma that is transferred from the first generation of trauma survivors to the second and further generations of offspring of the survivors via complex post-traumatic stress disorder mechanisms. Dr. Wade Nobles, one of my favorite psychiatrists, African-American brother, I've met him many times in my travels. When he talks about genocide, he provides one of the most functional definitions there is. Because genocide is more than just wiping out people. It's the deliberate and intentional destruction of a people through acts of commission and acts of omission designed to destroy a people's life force. The life force of every human being is the essence of who he or she or they are. Without that life force, you wander aimlessly, you meander without a sense of purpose, without an idea of who you are. So what was essential for the European to take away from us was our language, our culture, our sense of self. If you remember the opening scene in Roots, the first episode, when the Muslim brothers, when he said, behold, the only thing greater to yourself than thyself. And then he's holding the baby up to the creator. And then you have Kuta Kente, who's being whipped. And he wants to tell him that his name is Toby, that master has picked that name out for him. And it is indeed a beautiful name, the one who's whipping him says. and he wants him to be Toby. Because he knows as long as he's able to hold on to Kute Kente, he has a sense of who he is. And who he is a great African king, someone with pride and dignity, but as a Toby, he becomes nothing. Willie Lynch syndrome. Historians doubt the authenticity of the letter. Seen as a parable, however, the practices called for in the letter ring true even today, a sign of internalized oppression. Now, some of you may be familiar with the Willie Lynch. I know some of my friends like TX and some of my other brothers from Charlotte are quite familiar with it. I have a copy of the letter. I will not read the entire letter, but I will read some of it. It will give you a pretty good idea what it's about. I greet you on the bank of the James River in the year of our Lord, 1712. First, I shall thank you, the gentlemen of the colony of Virginia, for bringing me here. And this is 1712. I am here to solve some of your problems with slaves. Your invitation reached me on my modest plantation in the West Indies, where I have experimented with some of the newest and still the oldest methods for control of slaves. Ancient Rome would envy us if my program is implemented. As our boat sailed south on the James River, named for our illustrious king, whose version of the Bible we cherish, I saw enough to know that your problems are not unique. While Rome used cords of woods as crosses for standing human bodies along its highways in great numbers, you are using the trees and the rope on occasion. I caught the whiff of a dead slave hanging from a tree a couple miles back. You are not only losing valuable stock by hanging, you are having uprisings. Slaves are running away. Your crops are sometimes left in the fields too long for maximum profit. You suffer occasional fires. Your animals are killed. Gentlemen, you know what your problems are. I do not need to elaborate. I am not here to enumerate your problems. I am here to introduce you to a method of solving them. In my bag here, I have a foolproof method for controlling your Black slaves. I guarantee every one of you that if installed correctly, it will control the slaves for at least 300 years. My method is simple. Any member of your family or your overseer can use it. I have outlined a number of differences among the slaves and make the differences bigger. I use fear, distrust, and envy for control. These methods have worked on my modest plantation in the West Indies, and it will still work throughout the South. Take this simple little list of differences and think about them. On the top of my list is age, but it's only there because it starts with an A. The second is color or shade. There is intelligence, size, sex, size of plantations and structure of plantations, attitudes of owners, whether the slave lives in the valley, on a hill, east, west, north, south, have fine hair, coarse hair, or as tall as short. Now that you have a list of differences, I shall give you an outline of action. But before that, I shall assure you that distrust is stronger than trust, and envy stronger than adulation, respect, or admiration. The Black slaves, after receiving this indoctrination, shall carry on and will become self-refueling and self-generating for hundreds of years, maybe thousands. Don't forget, you must pitch the old Black male versus the young Black male, and the young Black male against the old Black male. You must use the dark-skinned slave versus the light-skinned slave, and the light-skinned slave versus the dark-skinned slave. You must use the female versus the male and the male versus the female. You must also have your white servants and overseers distrust all Blacks. It is necessary that your slave trust and depend on you and you alone. They must love, respect, and trust only us. Gentlemen, these kits are your keys to control. Use them. Have your wives and children use them. Never miss an opportunity. If used intensely for 1 year, the slaves themselves will remain perpetual, distrustful of each other. Thank you, gentlemen. That was Willie Lynch. That all whites should trust Blacks. Now, I know we're not generalizing, saying all of anything, but that was his idea. And what came to my mind when I thought about that, to give it contemporary, was the shooting death of Ahmad Arbery in February. And those two white men that came upon him in a pickup truck because he's jogging down the street. It's that distrust. I don't think white people want to be that way in many cases. I think it's a type of obtuse, voluntarily obtuse, where they don't learn about us. But then again, I digress somewhat here. So that's the Willie Lynch syndrome. And who can deny that it still exists with light skin, dark skin? Who can deny that when a baby is born, we still say, oh, that baby got good hair, or that baby has bad hair? Good hair is whose hair? White people's hair. Bad hair, natural hair, Black people's hair. So these are some of the more subtle things that are there. But if we were to go deeper into it, I'm sure each and every one of you out there this evening could provide a host of other situations that prove that Willie Lynch may not ever existed, but like parables, like all parables, there's an element of truth in them. In 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed. Emancipation was followed by 100 more years of institutionalized subjugation via the enactment of Black codes and Jim Crow apartheid, laws, peonage, unlawful debt servitude, convict leasing, domestic terrorism, and lynching. So even though the enslavement had ended, so to speak, the European found ways of continuing to keep people on his fields, picking the cotton and all, and to have people work for free. Post-traumatic slave syndrome, or PTSD, is a condition that exists when a population has experienced multi-generational trauma resulting from centuries of slavery and continues to experience oppression and institutionalized racism today. Added to this condition is a belief, real or imagined, that the benefits of the societies which they live are not accessible to them. This then is a post-traumatic slave syndrome. When you see some of the gangs in Chicago and New York and some of the major urban areas, and when you speak to some of the youth who are involved in these gangs, they don't think they're ever going to get to be 35, 40, 55, 60. They don't see Social Security as being real in their lives. They don't think that the benefits will accrue to them because of their being Black and because of the lives that they have. So we see it right there in a very obvious way. There's another term that I want to use and familiarize you with. It's MAT, multi-generational trauma, together with continued oppression and absence of opportunity to access the benefits available in the society leads to post-traumatic slave syndrome. The trauma, absence of opportunity, real or imagined, equals MAT. Dr. Joy has really done a great job in being able to, she wrote a book about this, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. And she says that the fact is, I don't have any experience of being a slave. However, 246 years of protracted slavery guaranteed the prosperity and privilege of the South's white progeny, while correspondingly relegating its Black progeny to a legacy of debt and suffering. As Malcolm used, and I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge, today is the 95th anniversary of El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X, born May 19th, 1925, my leader, one who I always will love, who saved my life in so many ways. Malcolm used to say back in the 50s and 60s that I, as Malcolm or any Black person, am not a slave, and that you as a white person standing in front of me, you're not a slave, but your great-great-great-great-grandfather was, and that my great-great-grandfather was the slave. So even though I'm not a slave, you're here, and you would not be here in the position that you're in now had you not been standing on ill-gotten gains, had you not been standing on the shoulders who made a way that was illegal, that was unjust. So they benefited from that. And I think in law, I don't know if I have any attorneys on the line, but if somebody gets a house or a car or a swimming pool with drug money, ill-gotten gains, that those goods that were purchased with drug money can be sold, can be taken away, and can be sold. So a lot of what America stands on now is that which is standing on the blood and the sweat and tears of people who had to work indefinitely for nothing. Dr. Ross, a licensed psychologist, talks about what some of those ills are: slave labor, forced migration, stolen property, dehumanization, mass incarceration, torture, medical experimentation, Tuskegee study, you could run the list, Discrimination, race riots, Newark, Detroit, 1967, Harlem, 64, Watts, 1965, police brutality. You could run that list all day of police brutality. Racial profiling, lynching, mass murder, long-lasting psychological effects, post-traumatic slave survivors and descendants. Those are just some of the ills. Symptoms of historical trauma: depression, anxiety, isolation, loss of sleep, discomfort around white people, shame, fear and distrust, loss of concentration, substance abuse, violence and suicide, anger. These are just a few. Now, some of you may say, well, yes, this happens, this is happening now to a great extent. Well, this is trauma. I don't think anybody would deny that not being able to go to work, radical, drastic changes in our lives, being stuck in houses, homes, apartments, around people that you love, but you would rather see them only 8 or 9 hours a day rather than 24 hours now. But it's the hope that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and at some point it will. If the pandemic of 1918 taught us anything, it did teach us that it will have an end. If the dust storm taught us anything during that same period, during the Great Depression in the 1929, 1930s, we know that it has an ending. But those who were enslaved didn't see an end. They knew that each generation, their children's children, would not have life any better. Results of, I have this thing at the top, so I cannot see what's up there. But when psychotherapy is something that could be very helpful. Those of you who are psychiatrists or in any way involved in the mental sciences that are out there, you know how important it is, despite the fact Black folks say if it happens at home, you keep it at home. We don't have to take our stuff out of the house. Well, there's a need to take it out of the house because the house may be a place where there's sicknesses and disillusionment is occurring. So we want to take it someplace else to neutral ground where it can be discussed and worked out. Lack of trust. Participants reported, this is some studies they interviewed people that were undergoing psychotherapy, and these are some of the things they said. Participants reported that while psychotherapy might be beneficial, most psychologists and psychotherapists lacked an adequate knowledge of African American life and struggled to accept or understand them. Anyone who goes to college to be a psychiatrist or any of the social sciences, if they've not taken a course on the Black studies or Black awareness or Black history, they need to go back and get their money back because that degree isn't going to be worth a damn thing. With people of color growing each and every day, with their numbers becoming the larger numbers, larger each and every day, to go to college for 4 years and go to grad school for 3 years and not take a course in African American history, science, social studies, or anything, will ill prepare you for the real world. Now, you may make a lot of money from whites, but you cannot compete in society without having a sense of oneself, without having a sense of those who are out there that you're going to confront day in and day out. Participants discussed the stereotypes of African Americans in the larger society and challenged psychologists and psychotherapists to be free of the attitudes held by a larger society. Now, I'm not limiting myself here to white people, but there are Black people, part of the bourgeoisie, who may not even, who have little knowledge of who they are and what that's all about. So they too must find themselves going the extra mile, taking those courses, talking to people, reading the kind of books by Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, Malcolm, I could run the list all day. We know what they are. But these are things that are important to put more tools in our toolbox. If a carpenter only has one tool, and that tool is a hammer, everything takes on the appearance of a nail. You bang on the chandelier, you bang on the window. But if you have enough foresight, put a screwdriver, a portable lathe in that box, a saw, you're much more likely to have the appropriate tool to get the job done. Cultural sensitivity, cultural competencies, race, and all those things that are so important, feminism, all those things play a part. Cultural sensitivity, participants reported a preference that race not matter in the provisions of mental health services, but feared that race did matter. Based on the paucity of knowledge and experience counselors have on relating to issues that the African American community has historically confronted. If this has existed any time, and it has, it certainly exists right now under the present administration. where there's no desire to have to learn anything about anything other than oneself, where there's no desire to have to take responsibility for any of the problems that continue to occur because one segment of the population seems to have tapped into privilege and the other segment has something other than privilege. So all this plays out in so many ways as we watch, be it Fox News, which I watch from time to time, no more than 30 minutes because I'm not a masochist. I can only hurt myself at so much, or be it MSNBC or National Public Radio, whatever you may have. Participants further believe that therapists were often influenced by frequent encounters, stereotypes of African Americans. How can you not be? How can you not look at a Black face and think that there's something that this person always has to prove oneself, that he or she is knowledgeable, that they didn't get there because of some affirmative action, that they're in that graduate school, that top name school because hell, they paid the price to be there. But oftentimes we got to bend over twice. And it's not too far removed from what Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois said in his Souls of Black Folks. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. It's almost like we have to be, in a healthy way, have two personalities, one for white people, one for Black people. Some people do a better job at balancing that than others. I think in the inner city, many of our brothers, they just know the one. That's the one that gets them through the streets, that gets them through the day, okay. Those of us who make a little more money, we know how to deal with the quote unquote man, and we know how to hang out and chill till the next episode with our homeboys too. We've always had to do that. We had to know how to talk to Maafa and how to talk to other people also. So we had to be successfully schizophrenic, and if that could be healthy. Sounds like an oxymoron there, but that's exactly what it had to be. Cultural beliefs, a belief in the needs to resolve family concerns within the family and the expectation that African Americans demonstrate strength. The stigma of mental illness with its associated embarrassment and shame were noted by individuals who received services as well as those with no prior experiences with mental health services as a significant barrier to mental health services. That stigma, you say, hey, you're already Black, and if you're gay, that's another stigma. If you're HIV positive, that's another stigma. If you're dark complexion, that's another stigma. If you live on the wrong, you get my point as to how all this adds up. Does historical trauma have only negative effects? Well, let's take a look. Positive aspects have arisen from historical trauma. Resilience, the ability to become strong, healthy, or successful despite bad occurrences. People look at us and say, my soul looks back as to how I got over, because we don't know how we did it. Our belief in God, and even though the image in many cases was of a white Jesus, of a white God back in those days, and the belief that the Bible told us that you are a servant, you servant, serve your master. That was all we knew. But on the other hand, that same Bible, when put in the hands of a man named Nat Turner in 1831 in Virginia, found his way to killing over 50 white people before he and others were captured and were hung by a tree, hung on a tree. So that Bible served a number of purposes to enslave, but it also served as a liberating factor nowadays. Today, I venture to say many of the holy books, the Quran, the Bible, whatever, can do the same thing and continues to do the same thing. Continue to confine people, or it can liberate them. Evolutionary, adoptive survival behaviors increase religious, spiritual coping. Church got us through. I mean, regardless of what happened, as to what our belief was, we felt that if we put forth hard work, when we died, we'd go to heaven and spend the rest of our days at the hem of Jesus. Evolutionary enhancement, the strong survive. On those during the Middle Passage, that took 6 to 7 weeks sometimes, depending on which way the wind was blowing. You had people who would stock those ships with bodies. You had two kind of packers, the tight packer and the loose packer. The loose packer believed if you gave the enslaved people a little more room, you're much more likely to have them survive that horrendous journey. The tight packers believe you took every inch, every bit of space you could to pack them in the way when you open up a can of sardines, That's how many of us were packed in. The belief was, yes, you're going to lose some, but if you start out with a lot, you'll end up with more on the other side. So the strong did survive in many cases. Strong kinship bonds. We believed in family. That continues to this very day, the strong kinship, knowing that the mother and father are the head of the households and that we create, we provide and protect for our offspring. Communalism. See, when Black people, particularly older Black people, I don't see this in many young folks. When I'm riding my bike, when I'm walking down the street, I see another older Black male or female, particularly a guy, that you always have the little nod of their head. Hey, how's it going? Because that's that understanding that we have the same mother, Mother Africa. That's the understanding we have the same experiences as being Black. Young folk, because they didn't go through the 60s or the 70s, and many of them who are so far removed from that, so far removed from keeping it real, so far removed from Black Lives Matter, they see another Black person, they may not even see you at all. So that communalism to some extent is lost on them. And I think it's lost also because our generation that was concerned about making money, in some cases, not all of them, failed to do the work necessary to instill a sense of pride, a sense of community, a sense of Pan-Africanism in these children. We were so busy making sure that that we fed them and schooled them properly that perhaps the sense of Black pride wasn't necessary, because after all, we have a Black president now, so the race situation must be over, right? We're all free. We could all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And yeah, we know that's not true. And keeping it real was a part. Going for a quality life despite historical trauma. Acknowledge, these are some of the things that we can do to help not get rid of. I don't think there are any, but people always say, well, what are some of the answers? What are some of the cures? I don't think there are any answers to the situation we've been in since 1619, 401 years. It's almost like when you play the game of pin the tail on the donkey. You're given clues. You're blindfolded, you're spun around, you have a tail and the donkey's on the wall, and you're looking for the donkey's, let's say derriere, in case there are some kids listening in. And you have to get to the left, to the right, upper, lower. You're given clues. I believe history is a series of clues that help us get closer to where we are. I don't believe there are any solutions. You go to a conference, well, what are the solutions? As if it could be wrapped up in a 24-hour or an 8-hour conference. No, they're still going to be there, but they advance us to the next level. Acknowledge and confront the historical trauma. For those parents who wish to save their children the pain, you're doing them a grave injustice by giving them a false sense of security. It's like the parents who don't want to give their Black male children the talk about when you get pulled over by the police, your white friends may not have to be as attentive as you need be, announcing with great effort where your hands are, why you're reaching in the glove department if that's for your insurance and your driver's license. Others don't have to do that, but that's a talk that many of us have to have. Work on understanding the historical trauma, understanding the totality of it, acknowledging Black History Month, which is January 1st to December 31st, not just February. Focus on healing oneself, as well as healing within and among the community. We have to start with ourselves. Every time I fly planes, and it ain't been flying lately, and as many of you probably haven't been either, but they always say, should we lose cabin pressure, mask will descend, place one on yourself first before attempting to help anyone else. It starts with ourselves. It starts with our families, and then it goes to our faith institutions. Be the one to raise the issue. You won't always be liked. I know in my family situations, when I bring up things about being Black, people say, Ahmad, here you go again with that Black stuff. Yes, I don't know, that's the only way I'm wired. I can't be anything else, and I don't want to be anything else. So there's a need to be persistent, regardless of the resistance you will inevitably confront. Ain't no doubt it. Spiritual, religious, and cultural healing services. There are many spiritual groups that meet and religious groups that meet that talk about that. Find the faith institutions that Afrocentric. The brother in Chicago, I'm blanking on his name right now, whose church President Obama attended for a while. And then
Jeremiah Wright.
Thank you, Jeremiah Wright. Thank you, TX. Jeremiah Wright, one who's Pan-Africanist, who uses religion. To me, religion must address social needs. If it's not addressing the social needs of the community, what good is it serving? And as Dr. King said, Church should not be an entertainment center. It shouldn't be people hooping and howling, running up and down the aisles, kicking their legs up for this release. Now, I understand the role it served during our enslavement. It was a way of getting us ready to go back into the slave fields Monday morning. But today is a different kind of life. If it's not educating us and taking us to the next level, I believe those spiritual, be they Muslim, Christian, I don't care what faith it is, they're failing us. And we need to go someplace else. They must address the social needs of the people. Otherwise, they're counter-revolutionary. And they're doing more to put chains on our brain. Free your mind and your behind will follow, as George Clinton says. And he knew what he was talking about with the Parliament Funkadelics. Cultural relevant psychological treatment services. If you're going to get psychological treatment, find a person, and that person could be white if they've done the work. I've known white people who are much more conscious than some Black people are. They've done the work, they've done the studies, they've traveled, they are just as well adept to what's going on.
Jane Elliott.
There you go, Jane Elliott. Go ahead, TX, that's my homeboy. Jane Elliott, and there are quite a few others out there too. Social justice, that's a phrase that's very popular nowadays among those young folks who are cognizant of what time it is. Social justice is some of the things that can help us because we have this collective memory, because we realize how far we've come. And as you saw during this playing of Lift Every Voice and Sing, many of you were able to put a name to some of those faces that you saw. Some of you perhaps didn't. Some of you perhaps didn't know. But that history that began in Africa, they started with the baobab tree over there and came all the way to President Obama. 400 years of travel. So if you know that social justice has always been something that we fought for. It's like playing chess. Sometimes they'll take your knight, you take their pawn. You take their king, and I don't know, I don't play chess, I don't know all the pieces, but the point is that when they take something of yours, you have to be willing to take something back. We use the law, we use the ballot, and as Malcolm says, sometimes we may have to use the bullet, the way Nat Turner and Denmark Vesey and Gabriel Prosser and Mark Essex and so many others did when they took things into their own hand, because America respects people who respect themselves. And sometimes you have to take to the streets, like we did in Birmingham, in Selma, in Memphis, with the sign carried by the sanitation workers, "I am a man." Here it is, 1968, and people are having to carry a sign saying, "I am a man," because they were disrespected so much. They were disrespected so much that Dr. King came there. Did not plan to spend another day, but when he saw what they were doing, he had to pick up the baton. And why was he there, Ahmad? Well, he was there because garbage workers, when they drove garbage trucks, well, they didn't drive, the white people drove them, they were in the back. When it rained, they could not find shelter in anywhere in the white neighborhoods. So they had to get into the back of the garbage truck. And if you know how garbage trucks work, when you pull the lever, it turns, and whatever garbage is there is swept up into the body of the vehicle. Those two Black men were swept up into the body of the vehicle. So they were fighting social injustices. And when Dr. King heard about that, he had to show up in Memphis. And we know what happened April 4th, 1968, when he was on the terrace, the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel, and those shots rang out that took the end of this man whose life was about peace. So history is more than dates. History is more than places. It is the totality of thought and practice through which a people creates itself, sustains itself, delivers itself, and introduces itself to humanity. What will be the things we pass on to our humanity? Certainly it has to be more than hip hop. It has to be more than styles of dress. It has to be the essence of who we are when we do the work to find out who it is we are. My favorite psychiatrist, Dr. Wade Noble, said that the psychological well-being of an individual is dependent on the cultural well-being of a people. Culture is the only thing that, when allowed to exist, will resist its own oppression. When you are in your culture, you are resisting everything else around you. You may let it in, but you know who you are. You know that that needle on that compass is focused towards the true north, whatever that may be for you. But when you take away that culture, when you are imbued with the culture of some other people who do not mean you the best, we end up with what we have now. We got like zombies, the living dead. Now, Sonia loved The Living Dead, and some of you other out there watch them. I think it's called The Living Dead, but it's about zombies. And that's what we have in many cases right now. And when you see some of the things we do to one another, and some of us shake our heads and say, Lord, I don't know what got into that child. It's because there's that sense of unknowing who one is. Want to pay a debt of gratitude to Dr. Leary for her contributing post-traumatic slave disorder, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. Keisha Ross, Dr. Keisha Ross, Impact of Historical Trauma on African Americans and its Effect on Help-Seeking Behaviors. And the New York Times for 1619 podcast audio series hosted by Nicole Hannah-Jones, who won an award recently. 1619 is a podcast. I don't know where you listen to your podcast, but wherever it is, go there and listen to those about six of them, dealing with 1619. It covers history, but it's done in a very wonderful way. And she did this for the New York Times. I believe this comes to an end with that. Don't anybody go anywhere. I hope we have some questions coming in. Is my host still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Are you getting questions by any way, by any means?
Let's see. There's one question, I believe. No questions.
Okay, for those not familiar with the process, they were so captivated by what I was saying, they didn't think about their questions. For those familiar with the process, if you look at the bottom of your screen, in the center, you'll see Q&A. If you tap onto that, you'll find space being made available where you could write your questions in at that point.
So one person said that they emailed questions in earlier.
Okay, well, I don't know where that is. I do see where Valerie Stewart has said your message is awesome. I'd like to recommend Hidden Colors. There is DVD. Hidden Colors is an excellent one. And the work I do with the African American Advisory Committee, the African Diaspora Council of Arizona, and I think those are the only two groups I'm affiliated with now. Once this virus piece comes to an end, we will resume what we was doing in the past, showing videos, panel discussions, and other things. And I hope many of you that live in the Valley will consider joining us, coming out to some of these events. Black, white, doesn't matter, because these are the ways we get to know one another and we understand one another. We are able to challenge some of the stereotypes and myths that we have about each other. They exist. We all know they exist. But unless we create a safe environment, a safe abode where we could be and feel free to ask questions without fear or threat of name calling, fighting, or any of those kind of things, we deal with the superficial. And if you know anything about me, I am not about superficiality. I believe in getting to the roots of stuff, because my 71 years on this planet, I want to leave a legacy for my grandchildren and my seven great-grandchildren. Okay, very informative. Hotep, I appreciate that, Brother Rob. Suggesting, do you have addressed individual or community healing? What suggestions do you have to address individual or community healings? I'm going to leave you my email address, and some of the things I would do. Find someone, preferably someone African-American who's a psychiatrist or a spiritual leader who's African-centered. What I mean by African-centered, they've done the reading, they hopefully will have done some travel, and they see their world through an African lens rather than a European lens. If they see that world through an Afrocentric lens, they're going to have the consciousness, they're going to have the awareness, they're going to have the sensitivity that's necessary to deal with you. Some of the work that I've done as a life coach, it really helps people to better understand who they are. And a life coach isn't counseling, because we ask people questions and we allow them to come up with their own answers. But that's what I would recommend. I would Google some of the things, because Google works in a lot of ways. There's a sister that I see on Facebook, Kia. I can't remember Kia's name. She's a doctor in psychology. And there's also Sister Nadir, Dr. Anisha Nadir, N-A-D-I-R. She's a social doctor and she's very conscious. So those are the kind of people that are there that can make a difference. And what you'll find, you reach out to someone, you meet with them. If it works, good. If it doesn't, you move on to somebody else until you find somebody who's in sync with your vibration and the way you see the world. Many argue that Black capitalism, the solution to our present condition, Black capitalism. Malcolm X said capitalism is like oh my goodness, a vulture. Capitalism must expand in order to survive. American workers, they want increase in pays, they want vacation time. So in order for that to happen, capitalism must expand, expand, expand. America makes up, I believe, 8%, if that much, of the world's population, but consumes over 25% of its natural resources. That's coal, that's natural oil, and there's natural gas and oil. So what does that mean? If we only 8% of the world's population consuming 25% of all the natural resources, the world isn't just going to give us that. We have to have a big army. We have to have the Marines. We have to have a military that'll go in there, pay money to the head of state. And if the head of state doesn't want to go along, find a way of overthrowing him, AKA Chile, AKA the Belgian Congo with Patrice Lumumba. You could run the list all day. Cuba, America tried to do it in Cuba, but Fidel Castro was able to hold the zone, and America still hates Cuba every time. You still can't freely go as it was prior to that time. So capitalism must expand in order to survive. I am an advocate of Ujamaa, cooperative economics. I'm not a capitalist. Even though I live in a capitalist society, I would never advocate it. And I know there's a brother here who deals with Black capitalism, but I think that's something that we could fall short of if we begin to look at African Ujamaa, more of the sharing rather than building our own little individual fiefdoms. I think we'll get along a lot better. What else do I have? Well, these things are rolling so fast, I don't know how to get them back down. Certainly want to thank everybody for the questions. I may not be able to get to all of them because I wanted to do this within an hour, and now we're at 8:02. So I'll just one or two more. If historical trauma is still being, oh, Brother Luther, yeah, Brother Justin, very wise brother. If historical trauma is still being deepened by current and ongoing acts of psychic violence, is it possible or even logical to envision a society that includes white people and the systems that give them power? I think, Brother Luton, we have to envision that. In my 71 years on this planet, I met white people. When I was in jail for speaking out against the war, and I was looking at 10 years, it was the American Union and their white attorneys who came to my salvation. The NAACP, I wrote them, they didn't come. They didn't want to help. I wrote the Ebony magazine back in 1967. They didn't come and help. But when somebody recommended the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, they sent their legal director, Mr. Melvin Wolf, all the way to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where I was in jail. And they said, we wanted to represent you. And when they began representing me, when word got out that me and Harvey were spending 10 and 6 years in jail for saying Black people should not be fighting a white man's war, people in that town began to sail a little boat. They had a sailboat. They would sail around the prison saying, free Harvey and Daniels. Those white people, to me, dealt with their white privilege. Those white people, to me, dealt with the idea of white supremacy. And when white people deal with those issues, they lose their white supremacy and they enter the human family for all kind. Until they address those issues, they will always be problems for us and primarily problems to all humanity because they don't understand they have it. We must bring these issues to the table. We must not help educate them because we are victims, so to speak, but we should provide opportunities for them to know about the Peggy McIntoshes and some of the other people that are doing it. Let white people deal with other white people. Let them have that happen. And I believe at that point, we form a common bond, a united front. And I think Malcolm talked about that. He said, hey, when these people can get together with their whiteness and understand that it's a problem for them and for us, we can have some bonds at that point. Thank you for a very informative presentation from Brother Terry Marks. I also mention Tracy Williams Marks, PhD, and noted psychologist. So that would be someone else. Tracy Williams Marks. That's someone else to look up. Tracy Marks, M-A-R-K-S, to Google that name. I'm going to answer one more, then I don't want to keep people any longer than you have. Not that you have anywhere to go, but to go see Netflix or Hula or whatever it's going to be, or drink some Chardonnay and get ready to call it a night. Calvin Pearson, a native of Hampton, Virginia, is founder of the present Project 1619, Inc., a nonprofit organization whose mission is to promote the arrival of first Africans in America to be brought ashore on English-occupied territory at Point Comfort, today's Fort Monroe in Hampton, Virginia. I mentioned that at the beginning, that we thought Jamestown was the first arrival point, but now we know that Old Point Comfort was the place that it is. I did say one more, but I'm going to do one more. Does post-traumatic slave syndrome only affect African Americans? For example, does it affect white people too? They definitely have a psychosis as a result of slavery and racism they historically perpetuated. I would say yes to that. The offshot or the offsetting factor for them, however, is a sense of supremacy. Is a sense of supremacy, a sense of privilege that they have. It's been said for a long time that the poorest white person is better than the richest N-word. You know, you may have heard that during that time. It affects them, and by us being who we are, not kowtowing, not scratching where we don't itch, by our being who we are, it brings them up to a higher level if they're going to deal with us. If they're going to form any type of bona fide, if they're going to form a genuine relationship with us, they have to meet us where we are. And when you look at Black Lives Matter and the whites who are affiliated with them, those are white people who have done the homework. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. These are white people who you won't find at a Trump rally, and maybe not even at a Biden rally. These are people who may not want to vote either way because they don't think either or is going to take us anywhere. You know, they wanted something better. So, but these are the folks that you find. Black people have never been able to make it where we are by ourselves. The Underground Railroad had to have white people that could shelter us. Jim Crow laws, fighting those marches that took place. White people have died. Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney, two Jews and a black in Philadelphia, Mississippi in 1964. We remember them. Those two white, and the whole civil rights movement when white people came down from affluent places for the summer. And they were lynched, they were beaten, they were killed. So white people have been there. Have they been there in sufficient numbers? No, we could always use more. But understand, it's incumbent upon us to take the lead. They can help us, they can't lead us. They should not be leading the NAACP. They will never lead the Nation of Islam or any of those other groups. Those groups must be chaired and led by us. But we could use their assistance. If they have limited deep pockets, they could write checks. Those are some of the things they could do. But, and also in addition to all that, they have to learn about themselves, the role their ancestors have played, and the role that they're playing today to find themselves in a position of power, of privilege, that they did not get there on their own. It was like they were born on second base and they thought they hit a double, but they were born there. So some of the work was already done for them. How much psychological treatment or support can help without separation? I don't understand. How much can psychological treatment or support help without separation? Oh, I see. There have been those who talked, the Republic of New Africa back in the 60s and 70s, and some of my older brothers may remember, they talked about separate states. They wanted 5 southern states. The Nation of Islam spoke about breaking away from America and having their own states, because they were saying that if we can't get along with you, give us some land that we could have, land that we could grow our own crops and our own pigs. Well, not pigs, we don't want any pigs. We could grow our sheep and chickens and everything else. That's not likely to happen. I think we could be in the midst of white people and psychologically you could be in it, but not of it. Like Stevie Wonder said, when you say you're in it, but not of it. I don't think we're going to find a time where we're separated any more than we already are in some of the enclaves or the ghettos or the barrios of America. In fact, they're separated to the extent that many of us will drive around those areas rather than have to go through them. That's the ghetto. We don't want to be associated with those people. That's where the soul of us lies. That's where the future lies, and that's where the work exists to be done. I'm going to call it an evening because maybe we should do one more. If you guys got to go somewhere, go ahead and go, because I'm going to hang around as long as there's somebody to hang around with. Do you think our greatest weapon is unity? Umoja has to be our greatest weapon. The unity or the lack thereof. As we learn history, we find that we didn't always agree with one another. Malcolm and King did not agree on what the objectives were. They agreed on the goal. They both agreed on they wanted freedom. King believed we could get our freedom going one way. Malcolm believed we could get it another way. Booker T and W.E.B., they didn't agree. They were at loggerheads with each other. Booker T talked about cast down your bucket where you are in the Atlanta Compromise. Dr. W.E. Du Bois said, we don't got to cast down our bucket. We want everything. We don't want a piece we don't want crumbs from the table. Hell, we want the whole table and what's on the table. Who else do we have? We have Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois. As progressively Black as Dr. E.B. Du Bois was, he talked about Marcus Garvey's Blackness, his darker hue, his darker skin. So even though these great people were there, unity does not mean every Black person is going to get along. That's never happened. It's always been that critical mass, those few that would lead the way for others, while the others would just hold on to the coattails, never shedding blood, never shedding a tear, but they ride in on the sacrifices made by others. So I think unity is, no matter what your religion, class, religion, we must understand the system of racism, white supremacy. Until you understand racism, white supremacy, everything you feel you understand will only confuse you. So when you watch TV and you can't figure out what the heck is going on, if you understand those 9 institutions of racism, white supremacy, economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war, and until you understand those 9 areas of what I call human contact, you will continue to be amazed, surprised at what is happening in this nation. So those are some of the things that we can do as we begin to learn more about white supremacy. White people have to learn about it, and damn sure Black people had best continue to learn about it, because we have yet to arrive. We have yet to arrive. I want to thank Brother Joseph Lewis for that question, and Pauline, and Justin Luter, and Sister Zarina, and all the others that have chimed in this evening. And thank you for coming out this evening. I hope that I've said something that has made a difference in your life, and that has certainly sparked a continuing interest in where we're going as a people, as a nation, and as a world. Whichever way Black America goes, so go America. If we find ourselves in the pits, America will be there too, with a heart, with a soul, with the linchpin of this nation. We don't know it. We don't always behave like we are, but those of us who know the essence and the importance of who we are know that. And that's something we need not ever apologize for. That's something that we should champion each and every day of our lives. And because of friends like TX and some of the others who are on it that I've known for 30, 40 years, we're keeping the struggle alive. And look to continue, the struggle continues, and it does continue in a very real sense. With that, I'm going to say goodnight to everybody. And thank you all for being out. Thank you for coming out. And we'll continue this as time goes by. Stay healthy, wear a mask. Don't be like your president. Your president. He ain't my president. Don't be like your president walking around thinking that he's not likely to catch anything. No, he's likely to catch it. And maybe this is the creator's way of waking up America and the world. Who knows? I don't know. I just stay in my lane and do what I do, and trust that other people will do the same too. Asante Sana, Hotep, Habari Gani. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, Ahmad.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ahmad.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Daniels. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and this program, and like to invite everybody else back next time. Just keep a watch on the Black Wall Street Facebook page and the rest of the sites for whatever else or whatever other programs will be coming up. But thank you all for joining us. And again, thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Levi. And good night.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Good night all.
Good night.